The opulence of the Grand Oak Hotel was on full display as the city's elite gathered for the annual charity gala. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above, casting a warm glow over the sea of elegantly dressed guests, each adorned in designer attire that spoke to their wealth and status. Samantha Reynolds, a striking figure in a navy blue gown that hugged her curves perfectly, stood at the center of it all, her laughter ringing out like a bell above the chatter. "Can you believe this?" she scoffed to her friend Lila, who wore a dazzling diamond necklace that would have made a smaller fortune. "They think a few lofty words about faith and charity will absolve them of their greed. It's laughable." Lila, sipping her champagne, raised an eyebrow. "You think they actually believe in all that? It's just a show, Sam. They want to look good for the cameras." "Exactly," Samantha replied, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "As if God cares about their overpriced suits and designer gowns. It's all a game to them." She glanced at the podium where a local pastor stood, passionately preaching about the virtues of giving and the power of faith. His voice resonated with sincerity, but to Samantha, it sounded like empty platitudes. If they really believed, they wouldn't be throwing away money on these extravagances. They'd be out there helping those in need. "Maybe they think this is how they help," Lila suggested, her tone slightly defensive. "A little money goes a long way, you know." "Or they just want to feel good about themselves," Samantha shot back. The crowd erupted in applause as the pastor finished his speech, but Samantha rolled her eyes, her expression one of pure disdain. "Wealth doesn't make you a good person. It just makes you comfortable." As the night wore on, Samantha mingled with other affluent guests, exchanging pleasantries and backhanded compliments. She flitted from one conversation to the next, her laughter masking a growing sense of detachment. The world of the rich and powerful felt increasingly hollow, but she refused to entertain such thoughts. After all, she was at the pinnacle of success, CEO of her own tech company, and had no time for the delusions of faith. Later, as the gala began to wind down, she slipped out onto the bustling street. The city was alive with activity. People hurried past her, wrapped in their own lives. Samantha stepped into the cool night air, feeling the weight of her heels on the pavement. The flickering streetlights illuminated her path, but her thoughts were far from the glitz of the gala. As she walked, her mind replayed the night's events. "Faith, humility, and all that nonsense," she muttered under her breath. "What do they know about real life?" Her brain buzzed with the thrill of her accomplishments and the security of her wealth. She reached into her designer handbag, pulling out her phone to check emails, dismissing the world around her. It wasn't until she turned a corner that she was jolted from her thoughts. A figure huddled against the wall caught her eye. A homeless man, ragged and dirty, his clothes tattered and worn. He sat with his knees drawn to his chest, his face hidden in the shadows. She felt a surge of irritation wash over her. "Get a job!" she snapped, her voice laced with disdain as she passed him. "You're just a drain on society." The man lifted his head slightly, his eyes meeting hers with an expression that was a mix of resignation and quiet strength. "Ma'am," he said softly, "it's not that simple." Samantha halted, her irritation flaring. "Oh, please, you think your life is hard? Try running a business in this economy." She took a step back, crossing her arms, ready to unleash a tirade about hard work and personal responsibility. "Money doesn't buy happiness either," the man replied, his voice steady yet tinged with weariness. "You may have everything, but you don't know what it's like to struggle." "Struggle?" Samantha laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. "I don't need to listen to this. You're just looking for a handout." "Maybe," he said, his gaze unwavering. "But maybe you're the one who needs to open your eyes." Samantha felt a flicker of something. Was it guilt? But she quickly extinguished it. "I don't have time for this," she said, turning on her heel, dismissing him and his words. As she walked away, she felt a strange mix of anger and confusion swirling within her. Once inside her luxurious apartment, she kicked off her heels, the sound echoing in the silence. She poured herself a glass of red wine, the rich liquid swirling like her thoughts. The encounter with the homeless man nagged at her, but she pushed it aside. "His life is his problem, not mine," she muttered, slumping onto her plush sofa. As the night drew on, she found herself staring at the blank screen of her laptop, unable to focus on work. The gala's speeches echoed in her mind, and she felt an unsettling emptiness creeping in. Just as she reached for her phone to drown out her thoughts with a mindless scroll through social media, the doorbell rang. Puzzled, She walked to the door, opening it to find an envelope lying on her doorstep. It was unmarked, the paper thick and luxurious, just like her surroundings. Frowning, she picked it up and closed the door behind her. The envelope felt heavy in her hands, as if it contained more than just words. Curiosity piqued. She opened it and pulled out a single sheet of paper, the handwriting elegant and flowing. As she read, her heart raced. The letter detailed her earlier encounter with the homeless man, calling out her arrogance and insensitivity. "Your wealth blinds you, Samantha," it read. "You scoff at what you do not understand. True wealth is not measured by what you possess, but by how you treat others." Samantha's breath caught in her throat. Who dared to send her such a letter? Who knew her well enough to call her out in such a personal way? It felt like a mirror reflecting an image she didn't want to see. "Who do you think you are?" she whispered to the empty room, a mix of anger and intrigue lighting a fire within her. She crumpled the letter in her hand, but the words lingered in her mind like a haunting refrain. As she leaned back against the plush cushions, the night's events swirled around her, leaving her unsettled and questioning. For the first time in a long while, Samantha found herself wondering if perhaps she didn't have all the answers. Every thought led her deeper into a labyrinth of doubt, the echoes of the gala and the homeless man intertwining to create a tapestry of uncertainty. As she sipped her wine, she realized that her world was beginning to shift, and she could no longer ignore the cracks forming in her carefully constructed facade. Samantha Reynolds sat behind her opulent mahogany desk, her eyes flicking over the skyline from her penthouse office. The city bustled below, a sea of yellow taxis and honking horns, but she was insulated in her world of luxury. She tapped her fingers impatiently on the polished surface, waiting for her assistant to bring her another cup of coffee. Her mind was still racing from the gala the previous evening, where she had reveled in the admiration of her peers while dismissing the religious fervor that had crept into the speeches. Just then the door swung open, and a small, wiry man with a shock of white hair stepped in. His clothes were well worn but clean, and his gentle demeanor immediately caught her off guard. "Good morning, Miss Reynolds," he said, his voice warm and inviting. "I'm Mr. Thompson." Samantha raised an eyebrow, momentarily taken aback. "And how can I help you, Mr. Thompson? I wasn't aware I had any appointments today." "I understand," he replied, his eyes twinkling with a quiet wisdom. "I am here because I wrote you a letter, the one you received last night." She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms defensively. "Ah, yes, the letter. I assume you're here to preach about faith and humility?" Her voice dripped with skepticism. Mr. Thompson chuckled softly, undeterred by her tone. "Not at all. I'm here to share my story, if you'll allow me." Samantha hesitated, her interest piqued despite herself. "Go ahead, but I can't promise I'll be impressed." With a nod, Mr. Thompson settled into the chair opposite her. "You see, I grew up in a small town with very little. My family struggled to make ends meet. I remember nights when we could barely afford a loaf of bread, but despite the hardships, my mother always taught me to have faith, not just in a higher power, but in the goodness of people." Samantha rolled her eyes, but Mr. Thompson continued, his voice steady. "When I was your age, I thought wealth was everything. I worked tirelessly, climbing the corporate ladder, convinced that success was measured by the number of zeros in my bank account. And I was successful in many ways, but I lost sight of what truly mattered." Samantha leaned forward, her curiosity battling with her dismissive attitude. "And what was that? The ability to buy fancy cars and live in a penthouse?" "Not quite," he said with a gentle smile. "I came to realize that material wealth is fragile. It can disappear in an instant. True wealth is found in the relationships we build, the kindness we show, and the faith we have in ourselves and others." "That sounds nice," she scoffed. "But I live in the real world, Mr. Thompson. Faith doesn't pay the bills or keep the lights on." "Perhaps," he said, undeterred, "but I've seen people with nothing find joy and purpose, while those with everything often feel empty. I lost everything once, my job, my home, my family. It was faith that pulled me through those dark times." Samantha frowned, her mind racing back to the gala, the laughter of her friends ringing in her ears. "So you expect me to believe that faith can replace financial security? That's naive." Mr. Thompson leaned in, his voice lowering. "It's not about replacing anything, Samantha. It's about understanding that life is more than just numbers on a balance sheet. It's about the moments we share, the compassion we extend. When I had nothing, I learned to appreciate the little things, the warmth of the sun, a stranger's smile, the laughter of children. Those are the treasures of life. For the first time, Samantha felt a crack in her armor. And when you had everything, what did you do with it? I shared it, he replied simply. I invested in my community, in people. I realized that my purpose was not just to accumulate wealth, but to uplift those around me. That is true success. His words hung in the air, heavy with significance. Samantha shifted in her seat, feeling uncharacteristically vulnerable. But what if it all falls apart again? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Then you pick yourself up and start again, he said with a reassuring smile. Every setback is a chance to learn, to grow. Faith is not the absence of doubt. It's the belief that there's something greater at work, even when we can't see it. Samantha considered this, her thoughts churning. I've built my life on logic and control. What you're talking about sounds chaotic. Mr. Thompson chuckled softly again. Perhaps, but chaos often leads to beauty. Think about it. Many of the most beautiful things in life happen unexpectedly. Love, hope, joy. They don't follow a formula. She leaned back, her mind racing as she processed his words. You really believe that? That love and joy can come from chaos? Absolutely, he replied, his eyes sparkling. The world is unpredictable, but that's where faith comes in. Trusting that no matter how chaotic things may seem, there's a reason behind it all. Samantha felt a flicker of something deep within her, a stirring that she hadn't experienced in years. And what if I don't believe? What if I can't? Then ask questions, he encouraged, his tone gentle but firm. Seek out the answers. Life is a journey, and it's okay to be uncertain. Just be open to the possibility that there's more to life than what you can see. Silence enveloped the room as Samantha contemplated his words. For the first time, she wondered if perhaps her skepticism was a barrier she had built to protect herself, a fortress that had kept her isolated from the richness of human experience. Mr. Thompson, she began hesitantly, what if I wanted to learn more? Where would I even start? A soft smile spread across his face, illuminating the lines etched into his skin. Start with small steps. Engage with people. Listen to their stories. Volunteer in your community. Open your heart to the experiences of others. You may find that humility can be a powerful teacher. Samantha sat in silence, overwhelmed by the weight of his suggestion. She had always viewed her time as a commodity, something to be spent wisely and efficiently. The notion of volunteering, of giving her time to others, felt foreign but strangely appealing. I'll think about it, she said finally, her voice laced with uncertainty. Good, Mr. Thompson said, standing up and adjusting his coat. Remember, Samantha, it's okay to question. It's okay to doubt. Just don't forget to look for the answers, even if they lead you down unexpected paths. As he turned to leave, she felt an unfamiliar pang of regret. Wait, she called after him. Can we talk again? I mean, I'd like to hear more about your experiences. He paused, glancing back with a warm smile. Of course, I'm always here if you seek me out. Just remember, sometimes the answers we seek are found in the most unexpected places. With that, he exited her office, leaving Samantha enveloped in a haze of contemplation. She gazed out at the city, her mind racing with possibilities. For the first time, she considered the idea that perhaps her life could be more than just a pursuit of wealth and status. Perhaps there was a deeper meaning waiting to be discovered, and she, in all her privilege, was finally ready to question the foundations she had built her life upon. Samantha Reynolds stood at the entrance of the community center, a place she had never imagined setting foot in. The bustling city around her seemed to fade away as she felt an uncharacteristic tug at her heart. She had driven past this building countless times, always in a hurry, always preoccupied with her own world of wealth and success. Today, however, something was different. A faint memory of Mr. Thompson's gentle voice echoed in her mind, urging her to reconsider her approach to life. With a deep breath, she pushed the door open and stepped inside. The warmth of the room enveloped her, contrasting sharply with the chill of the autumn air outside. Laughter and chatter filled the space, mingling with the aroma of freshly prepared meals. Samantha's heart raced as she took in the scene, a group of volunteers smiling and working together to serve food to those in need. The atmosphere was vibrant, alive with a sense of community that she had never felt in her own life. "Can I help with anything?" she asked hesitantly, approaching a woman who was ladling soup into bowls. The woman turned, her face lighting up with a smile. Absolutely. We could use more hands. Here, take this and fill those bowls over there. She handed Samantha a ladle, and for a moment, Samantha felt a rush of uncertainty. This wasn't her world. She was used to boardrooms and high-stakes negotiations, not serving meals to strangers. But as she dipped the ladle into the steaming pot, something shifted within her. As she filled the bowls, she began to notice the faces of the people waiting in line. Some looked weary, others hopeful, but all shared a sense of gratitude when they received their meals. A little girl, no more than 8 years old, caught her attention. With bright eyes and a shy smile, the girl clutched a crumpled paper in her small hands. "What's that you've got?" Samantha asked, kneeling down to meet the girl's gaze. "It's my dream," the girl said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want to be a doctor and help people get better." Samantha's heart ached at the innocence in the girl's eyes. "That's a wonderful dream. You can do it, you know. You just have to work hard and believe in yourself." The girl nodded, her eyes shining with determination. "My mom says I can do anything if I just try." "Your mom sounds very wise," Samantha replied, feeling a strange connection to this child. She began to reflect on her own life, the privileges she had taken for granted, the opportunities that had fallen into her lap simply because of her wealth. "Do you have a dream?" the girl asked, tilting her head curiously. Samantha hesitated, the question hanging in the air like a weight. I used to have dreams," she admitted slowly, "but I think I got lost somewhere along the way." "Maybe you just need to find them again," the girl suggested, her innocent wisdom striking a chord in Samantha's heart. "I think you might be right," Samantha said, her voice thick with emotion. The conversation with the girl stirred something deep within her, a longing for something more meaningful than the empty accolades of her corporate life. She found herself wanting to learn more, to understand the struggles of others, and to share in their joys, however small. As the meal service continued, Samantha immersed herself in the rhythm of the kitchen. She laughed with the other volunteers, shared stories, and realized she was enjoying herself in a way she hadn't felt in years. The joy she found in serving others was a stark contrast to the hollow satisfaction of closing a big deal or accumulating wealth. For the first time, her heart felt light, unburdened by the weight of her possessions. After the last meal was served, Samantha stepped outside to catch her breath. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden hue over the city. She leaned against the wall of the community center, her mind racing. What would her life look like if she embraced this new perspective? Could she truly let go of her obsession with wealth and status? "Hey, you did great in there," a voice broke her thoughts, and she turned to see Mr. Thompson approaching, his eyes twinkling with pride. "Mr. Thompson!" she exclaimed, her heart swelling with a mixture of gratitude and excitement. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I volunteer here every week," he replied, his voice warm and inviting. "I'm glad you decided to join us. It seems you were a natural." "Thank you. I didn't realize how fulfilling it could be," Samantha admitted, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. "I've been so caught up in my own world that I forgot about the simple joys of helping others. Sometimes it takes a little nudge from the universe to remind us of what truly matters," he said, his gaze steady. "You have a good heart, Samantha. Don't let the world change that." She smiled, feeling a connection with him that transcended their previous encounters. "How did you know I'd be here today?" "I didn't know for certain, but I had a feeling you might be drawn to this place," he said, his voice filled with understanding. "You're at a crossroads, my dear. It's a time for reflection and growth." Samantha nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. "I've been thinking about my life a lot lately. I want to change, but I'm not sure how." "Change begins with small steps," Mr. Thompson advised, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "It's about opening your heart and being willing to learn from others. You've already taken the first step by being here today." As they spoke, Samantha felt a warmth spreading through her chest, a sense of hope igniting within her. She had spent so long believing that her wealth defined her, that it was her shield against the world. But here, among people who had little in terms of material possessions, she found a richness she had never known. "Do you think I can make a difference?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Absolutely," he assured her. "You have the power to inspire others, to show them that there's more to life than money. It starts with you embracing your own journey. With those words, Samantha felt a shift within herself. The walls she had built around her heart began to crumble, and for the first time in years, she felt vulnerable yet alive. She realized that the true meaning of wealth lay not in the numbers on her bank statement, but in the connections she made and the lives she touched. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the city, Samantha knew she was on the brink of a profound transformation. She was ready to embrace a new chapter in her life, one that would require courage, humility, and a willingness to learn. The world around her was vast, and for the first time she was eager to explore it beyond the confines of her high-rise office and lavish parties. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson," she said softly, her heart brimming with gratitude. "For everything." He smiled, his eyes reflecting the wisdom of 1,000 lifetimes. "Just remember, Samantha, the journey is only beginning. Stay open to what life has to offer, and you'll find your way." With those words echoing in her mind, Samantha stepped back into the bustling streets, ready to embrace whatever came next. The city that once felt so isolating now seemed full of possibilities, each corner a new adventure waiting to unfold. She felt lighter, as if she had shed a layer of her former self, and for the first time in a long while she was excited about the future. The grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton was adorned with opulence. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen raindrops, and tables were draped in silk, each set with fine china and gleaming silverware. Samantha Reynolds stood at the center of it all, her designer dress a perfect fit for the atmosphere of wealth and sophistication that surrounded her. She glanced at the guests mingling, a sea of familiar faces, all wealthy business people with their perfectly curated lives. As the evening progressed, the air was thick with laughter and clinking glasses, but Samantha found herself distracted by a familiar figure on stage. Mr. Thompson was there, standing modestly at the podium, his silver hair catching the light as he spoke passionately about faith and community. Samantha rolled her eyes, exchanging a glance with her friend Clara, who stood beside her, a cocktail in hand. "Can you believe this?" Samantha muttered, her voice laced with sarcasm. "He's going to preach to a room full of millionaires about humility and charity," Clara snickered. "It's rich, isn't it? As if any of us need his wisdom to know how to give back." Samantha smirked, but a small part of her felt a twinge of unease. She had invited Mr. Thompson to speak, hoping that his stories of resilience and faith would inspire her colleagues. Yet as she listened to the old man, his words seemed to drift right past her, absorbed by the glimmering facade of wealth that surrounded them. "Material wealth is fleeting," Mr. Thompson was saying, his voice steady. "But the connections we make and the kindness we show each other can last a lifetime. True wealth lies not in what we have, but in what we give." Samantha's thoughts were interrupted by a group of her friends snickering at the back of the room. She turned to see them huddled together, whispering as they pointed at Mr. Thompson, their laughter ringing out like a jarring note against the symphony of the event. "Look at him," one of them, Mark, said loudly enough for those nearby to hear. "He's got the wisdom of a sage, but he's still just an old man in a thrift store suit. What does he know about our world?" Samantha's heart raced, her cheeks flushing. She felt a mixture of anger and embarrassment wash over her. Here was Mr. Thompson, a man who had opened her eyes to a different way of thinking, and her friends were treating him like a punchline. She hesitated, caught between her ingrained loyalty to her social circle and the values she had begun to question. "Maybe he knows more than you think," she finally said, her voice sharper than she intended. The table fell silent, and all eyes were on her, surprised by the sudden shift in her demeanor. Mark raised an eyebrow. "Oh, really? And what would that be? How to live off the kindness of strangers?" Samantha felt a surge of determination. She stepped forward, her hands clenched at her sides. "He's not just some old man. He's wise, and he's lived through things none of us can even imagine. You should be ashamed of yourselves for mocking him." The room was silent, the tension palpable. Her friends exchanged incredulous looks, and for a moment, Samantha felt exposed, like she was standing on a precipice. She had always prided herself on being part of this elite circle, but now she felt like an outsider among them. "Are you seriously defending him?" Clara asked. Disbelief etched on her face. "You're not actually considering his ideas, are you?" Samantha took a deep breath, her resolve solidifying. "Yes, I am. Maybe we should listen to what he has to say instead of making fun of him. It might open our eyes to something we've been missing." With that, she turned her back on her friends and walked toward the stage, her heart pounding in her chest. Mr. Thompson's eyes met hers, and a hint of surprise flickered across his face as she approached. "Thank you for speaking, Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos of emotions swirling inside her. "Your words are important, and they resonate more than you know." "Thank you, Samantha," he replied, a warm smile spreading across his face. "It takes courage to stand up for what you believe in, especially when it goes against the tide." As she stepped back into the crowd, Samantha could feel the weight of her friends' gazes on her, a mix of confusion and disapproval. But a newfound sense of liberation surged through her. She was no longer merely a part of the social machine. She was beginning to carve out her own identity, one that was not solely defined by wealth and status. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Mr. Thompson continued to speak, sharing stories that tugged at her heartstrings, tales of struggle, faith, and the kindness of strangers. For the first time in a long while, Samantha felt a glimmer of something she hadn't experienced in years, a sense of purpose. She watched as her colleagues shifted in their seats, some nodding along, others still whispering doubts amongst themselves. But she didn't care. She had taken a step onto a new path. After the event, as the guests began to filter out, Samantha found herself lingering, searching for Mr. Thompson amid the departing crowd. She spotted him by the entrance, surrounded by a few attendees who were genuinely engaging with him. It warmed her heart to see that, despite the initial mockery, some were willing to embrace his message. "Mr. Thompson," she called out, weaving through the throng of guests. "Can we talk?" He turned, his eyes lighting up at the sight of her. "Of course, Samantha. I would love that." They found a quieter corner away from the noise, and Samantha could feel the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. "I'm sorry about what happened back there," she began, her voice earnest. "I didn't mean to put you in that position." "Don't apologize," he said gently. "You did something brave. It's not easy to challenge the norm, especially among friends. You've taken the first step toward understanding what true wealth means." "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," she confessed, her brow creased in thought, "about how wealth isn't just about money, but about connection and kindness. I feel like I've been living in a bubble, and I don't want to ignore the world outside of it anymore." Mr. Thompson nodded, his expression encouraging. "Awareness is the first step, Samantha. The next is action. It's not enough to understand. You must also engage, to reach out and make a difference. It's in those moments that you'll find fulfillment." She pondered his words, her mind racing with possibilities. "I want to help, to do something meaningful. Maybe we could work together at the community center. I'd like to learn more from you." A twinkle of approval sparkled in his eyes. "That sounds like a wonderful idea. Your skills and resources could make a significant impact." As they spoke, Samantha felt a deep sense of connection forming between them, one that transcended their different backgrounds. She realized that this was what she had been missing, a sense of community, a desire to give back, and the wisdom that came from genuine experiences. But as the night wore on, the feeling of unease began to creep back in. Could she truly break away from the superficiality of her social circle? Would her friends understand her newfound perspective? Or would they continue to mock what they didn't comprehend? Her thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of Clara, who approached with a hesitant smile. "Hey, I didn't mean to upset you earlier," she said, her tone softer now. "I just think we're all just trying to navigate this world, you know?" Samantha looked at her friend, searching for sincerity. "I understand, Clara. But maybe it's time to rethink what navigating means. There's more to life than just wealth and status." Clara frowned, clearly grappling with the weight of Samantha's words. "I guess we all have our own paths to follow," she said quietly, before turning away. Samantha watched as her friend walked back into the crowd, a sense of loss washing over her. This was the beginning of a new chapter in her life, one that would challenge her relationships and force her to confront the values she had held so dear. As Mr. Thompson began to gather his things, Samantha felt a surge of gratitude for his presence in her life. She was no longer just a wealthy businesswoman. She was becoming Samantha, a woman seeking purpose and connection in a world that often seemed cold and indifferent. "Thank you for tonight," she said, her voice full of sincerity. "You've opened my eyes in ways I never thought possible." Mr. Thompson smiled, his eyes wise and kind. "Remember, Samantha, the journey is just beginning. Stay true to your heart, and don't be afraid to forge your own path." As they stepped outside into the cool night air, Samantha felt a sense of hope blossom within her. The stars twinkled above, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, light could be found. And as she walked alongside Mr. Thompson, she realized that the journey ahead would be filled with challenges, but also with endless possibilities for growth, understanding, and most importantly, connection. Samantha Reynolds stood at the expansive window of her high-rise office, her gaze fixed on the sprawling city below. The sun was setting, casting a golden hue over the skyscrapers, but her mind was elsewhere, replaying the events of the charity event. The laughter and scorn of her peers echoed in her ears, and she could still see the look of surprise on Mr. Thompson's face when she had defended him. It was a moment that felt both liberating and unsettling. What had compelled her to speak up? Was it genuine compassion, or simply a reaction against the superficiality of her social circle? As the city lights flickered to life, Samantha sighed deeply, her heart heavy. She felt an inexplicable urge to reach out to Mr. Thompson, to seek his wisdom once again. The old man had a way of making her question her beliefs, and despite her initial skepticism, she found herself yearning for more of his insight. It was as if he had opened a door to a part of her that had been dormant, buried beneath layers of ambition and pride. The following morning, determined to find him, Samantha drove to the community center where he volunteered. The streets were bustling with people starting their day, and for the first time, she noticed the intricacies of their lives, the worn shoes, the hurried glances, the laughter shared between strangers. It struck her how different their world was from hers, yet how similar their basic needs were. She parked her car and walked into the center, the familiar scent of coffee and pastries greeting her. "Good morning, Samantha," a cheerful volunteer called out, waving her over. It was Clara, a young woman with a bright smile who had worked alongside her during the meal service. "Good morning, Clara. Have you seen Mr. Thompson?" Samantha asked, her excitement palpable. Clara's smile faded slightly as she shook her head. "He usually comes in around this time. He loves to talk to the kids after school. Why don't you wait for him? I'm sure he'll be here soon." Samantha nodded, taking a seat at one of the long tables. She watched as volunteers prepared meals and organized supplies, their camaraderie filling the room with warmth. A group of children burst in, their laughter ringing like music, and Samantha felt a smile creep onto her face. She was beginning to understand the joy that came from serving others, a stark contrast to the hollow satisfaction of her corporate victories. Just as she was lost in thought, she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Ah, Samantha, you've come back," Mr. Thompson greeted, his eyes twinkling with delight. "I was hoping you would." "I wanted to talk," she said, her voice steady. "After the event, I realized I need to understand more about everything, about faith, humility, and what it means to be truly wealthy." Mr. Thompson smiled knowingly. "That's a brave step, my dear. Let's take a walk outside. The fresh air will do us good." They strolled through the nearby park, the hustle and bustle of the city a soft murmur behind them. The park was alive with children playing, couples walking hand in hand, and elderly folks feeding the ducks. It was a world that felt alive, vibrant, everything Samantha had overlooked in her pursuit of wealth. "Tell me, Samantha," Mr. Thompson began, "what do you believe wealth is?" Samantha paused, considering her answer. "Wealth is financial security, power, the ability to do what I want when I want." "Ah," he replied thoughtfully. "But what happens when that security is threatened? What if one day those material possessions are stripped away? What remains?" His question hung in the air, and she felt a pang of vulnerability at the thought. "I suppose I would feel lost. But that's why I work so hard, to ensure I never have to face that." Mr. Thompson chuckled softly. "And yet, in your pursuit of security, have you considered that you might be building walls around your heart? Sometimes the greatest wealth comes from connections, from love, and from understanding others." Samantha frowned, trying to digest his words. "You mean, like the connections I have with my colleagues?" "Those connections can be surface level, dear. True connection comes from vulnerability, from sharing your struggles and joys with others. It's about being present and listening." He paused, looking at her intently. "Have you ever opened your heart to someone beyond your social status?" The question struck her like a lightning bolt. She had spent years surrounded by people who mirrored her success. But had she ever truly connected with anyone? "Not really," she admitted, feeling a weight in her chest. Then perhaps it's time to start, he suggested gently. Find someone whose life story intrigues you, someone whose struggles differ from yours. You might discover a new perspective. As they walked, the conversation shifted from deep philosophical insights to lighter topics, like Mr. Thompson's favorite books and his childhood memories. Samantha felt a warmth in their dialogue, a connection that was both refreshing and unexpected. It was a stark contrast to the often transactional nature of her interactions in the corporate world. Later that evening, as Samantha sat in her sleek office, she found herself contemplating Mr. Thompson's advice. What would it look like to reach out to someone outside her usual circles? The thought was both exciting and terrifying. Suddenly, her phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. It was a message from her CFO, Mark. "We need to talk. Urgent. Come to my office." Her heart raced as she made her way to Mark's office, a sense of foreboding creeping in. As she entered, she found him pacing, his face drawn with concern. "Samantha, we've hit a major snag with our latest investment. There are rumors of a significant downturn, and if it escalates, we could be facing severe financial repercussions," he said, his voice tense. "What do you mean? We're stable. We've always been stable," she insisted, her confidence faltering. "I wish that were true, but the market is unpredictable. We need to prepare ourselves for potential losses. This could affect your bonuses, our growth plans, everything." Samantha felt the ground shift beneath her. For the first time in years, she felt vulnerable, exposed. "What are you suggesting we do?" Mark sighed. "We need to cut costs. Layoffs might be necessary. We should start preparing for the worst." As she walked back to her office, the weight of his words pressed heavily on her shoulders. Her mind raced, consumed with thoughts of her company's future and her own security. It was a stark reminder of how fragile her world truly was. In the midst of her turmoil, she recalled Mr. Thompson's words about vulnerability and connection. What if she reached out to him? What if she sought his guidance in this uncertain time? With renewed determination, she picked up her phone and dialed his number. Each ring felt like an eternity, but finally, she heard his warm voice on the other end. "Mr. Thompson, it's Samantha. I need to talk." "Of course, my dear. What's on your mind?" he asked, his tone inviting. "I'm facing a crisis at work. Everything feels shaky. I don't know how to handle it." "Ah, crises can be daunting, but they also present opportunities for growth. Why don't we meet tomorrow? I'd love to help you navigate this." Gratefulness washed over her. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson. That would mean a lot." As she ended the call, she felt a flicker of hope ignite within her. Perhaps this was the moment she had longed for, the chance to embrace uncertainty and redefine what truly mattered in her life. Samantha Reynolds sat at her sleek, glass-topped desk in her high-rise office, the city skyline glittering behind her. The news had hit her like a freight train. Her company, once a beacon of success, was on the brink of bankruptcy. The financial analysts had painted a grim picture, and the weight of impending failure pressed down on her chest. She could barely breathe. The lavish lifestyle she had meticulously built seemed to crumble before her eyes, leaving her feeling exposed and vulnerable. She stared blankly at the spreadsheets on her computer screen, numbers swirling into a haze. Just last week, she had felt a flicker of hope igniting within her, inspired by her conversations with Mr. Thompson. The old man's wisdom had begun to reshape her understanding of wealth and fulfillment. But now, that spark felt like a cruel joke. How could she embrace the notion of faith and humility when everything she had worked for threatened to slip away? Desperately, she reached for her phone, her fingers trembling as she scrolled through her contacts. Mr. Thompson had been a lifeline, guiding her through her tumultuous emotional landscape. But where was he now? She needed him more than ever. With a heavy heart, she sent a message, hoping he would respond. "Mr. Thompson, I need to talk. Please, can we meet?" An agonizing hour passed, and just as she began to lose hope, a notification popped up. A response from the old man. "Meet me at the park bench by the community center. I will be waiting." Samantha's heart raced. She grabbed her coat and rushed out of her office, the chill of autumn air biting at her skin as she made her way to the community center. The streets felt different today, bustling with life but devoid of any warmth. Each step felt heavier, dragging her down into the uncertainty that loomed over her. When she arrived at the park, she spotted the bench where Mr. Thompson often sat. But to her dismay, he was nowhere to be found. A wave of panic washed over her. Had something happened to him? Was he not coming? As she scanned the area, her gaze fell upon a piece of paper resting on the bench. She approached cautiously, her heart pounding as she picked it up. The note was written in Mr. Thompson's familiar, elegant script. Dear Samantha, sometimes we must face the darkness to discover the light within. Trust in the journey. Your struggles are not the end, but the beginning of something greater. Keep your heart open. Mr. Thompson. She clutched the note tightly, feeling a mix of confusion and despair. What did he mean? How could she trust in a journey that felt so bleak? Just as she was about to crumble under the weight of her thoughts, she heard a voice behind her, raspy yet familiar. Excuse me, miss? Samantha turned abruptly, her eyes widening in shock. It was the homeless man she had dismissed so callously weeks ago. He was dirty and disheveled, but there was a spark in his eyes that she hadn't noticed before. Do you remember me? He asked, a faint smile breaking through his unkempt beard. Samantha hesitated, her mind racing back to that night when she had scoffed at him, wrapped in her own bubble of privilege. Yes, I remember you, she stammered, feeling an overwhelming wave of shame wash over her. He stepped closer, the warmth of his presence contrasting sharply with the chill in the air. I know you've been through a lot lately. I've seen it in your eyes. You know, I used to be like you, successful, wealthy, but I lost everything. His gaze bore into hers. A somber understanding reflected back at her. What do you mean? You were successful? The incredulity in her voice was palpable, and she felt a strange kinship forming with this man who had once been invisible to her. He nodded, a hint of sadness clouding his features. I had a thriving business, just like you, but I got caught up in my own ego, my own wealth. A series of bad decisions and a betrayal by someone I trusted stripped me of everything. I ended up on these streets. But you know what? I found something there that I never had before. What could possibly be worth losing everything, she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Perspective, he replied simply. When you have nothing, you see life differently. You learn to appreciate the small things, friendship, kindness, the warmth of a smile. I learned about resilience and the strength that comes from struggle. Samantha felt a lump forming in her throat. I don't know how to navigate this, she confessed, her voice trembling. I've always relied on my wealth and my status. Without them, I feel lost. He took a step closer, his presence grounding her. It's okay to feel lost, but you have to choose how you respond to this moment. You can let it break you, or you can let it teach you. You're at a crossroads, and it's up to you to decide which path to take. What if I fail? She asked, the fear creeping back into her voice. Failure is a part of life. It's how we learn. The question is, will you allow it to define you, or will you rise from it? His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Samantha stared into his eyes, searching for answers. The old man had once been a stranger to her, yet here was someone who understood her struggle intimately. What do I do? She asked, desperation lacing her tone. He smiled, a warm, genuine smile that lit up his weary face. Start by being kind, to yourself and to others. Find ways to give back, to connect with people. Embrace the vulnerability. It's in those moments that you'll find your true strength. As she stood there, enveloped in the raw honesty of his words, Samantha felt a shift within her. The world didn't revolve around her wealth or status. It was about connections, understanding, and empathy. She had spent so long in her ivory tower that she had lost sight of what truly mattered. I'll try, she said finally, her voice firmer now. I'll try to find the strength in this struggle. Good, he said, his eyes twinkling with encouragement. Remember, the journey is just beginning. You're not alone in this. Samantha watched as he turned to leave, his figure blending into the busy street. The weight of her circumstances still felt heavy, but for the first time she sensed a flicker of hope. Mr. Thompson's note echoed in her mind, and she realized that perhaps this was the beginning of her true awakening. With renewed determination, she took a deep breath and looked out at the bustling city around her, ready to embrace whatever lay ahead. She knew the road would be challenging, but she was prepared to walk it, with faith, humility, and an open heart.